For the most wild yet most homely narrative which I am about to pen, I neither expect nor solicit belief. Mad indeed would I be to expect it, in a case where my very senses reject their own evidence, and yet mad am I not, and surely I do not dream, for tomorrow I die, and today would unburden my soul. My immediate purpose is to place before the world plainly, succinctly, and without comment, a series of mere household events. In their consequences, these events have terrified, have tortured, have destroyed me. And yet, I will not attempt to expound them. To me, they have presented little but horror. To many, they seem less terrible than bouquets. Hereafter, perhaps, some intellect may be found which will reduce my phantasm to mere commonplace. Some intellect more calm, more logical, and far less excitable than my own, which will perceive in the circumstances I detail with awe nothing more than an ordinary succession of very natural causes and effects.
From my infancy, I was noted for the docility and humanity of my disposition. My tenderness of heart was even so conspicuous as to make the jest of my companions. I was especially fond of animals, and was indulged by my parents with a great variety of pets, and with these I spent most of my time, and was never so happy as to feeding them and caressing them. This peculiarity of my character grew with my growth, and in my manhood I derived it as one of my principal sources of pleasure. To those who have cherished an affection for a faithful and sagacious dog, I need hardly do the trouble of explaining the nature of intensity and gratification thus derivable. There is something unselfish and sacrificing in the love of a brute, which goes directly to the heart of him who has a frequent occasion to test the paltry friendship and gossamer fidelity of mere man. I married early. I was happy to find a wife that was disposition not uncongenial with my own. She observed my nature and partiality for domestic pets, and she lost no opportunity for procuring those of the most agreeable kind. You know, we had birds, goldfish, a fine dog, a monkey, and a cat. The latter was remarkably large, a beautiful animal, entirely black and as sagacious in an astonishing degree. And speaking of his intelligence, my wife, who was a little tinctured with superstition, made a frequent allusion to the ancient popular notion, which regarded all cats as witches in disguise. Not that she was ever serious upon this point. I just mentioned the matter for no better reason than it happens to just now be remembered. Pluto was the cat's name. It's my favorite pet and playmate. I alone had fed him. He attended me wherever I went about the house. It was even with difficulty that I could prevent him from following me through the streets. And our friendship lasted in this manner for several years, during which my general temperament and character, through the instrumentality of fiend intemperance, and I blush to confess it, experienced a radical alteration for the worst. I grew, day by day, more moody, more irritable, and more regardless of the feelings of others. I suffered myself to use the intemperate language to my life, and at length, I even offered her violence, personal violence. My pets, of course. They were made to feel the change in my disposition. I not only neglected, but ill-used them. For Pluto, however, I retained sufficient regard to restrain me from maltreating him, as I made no scruple of maltreating the rabbits, the monkey, or even the dog, by when accident or through affection they came in my way. But what disease grew upon me? And what disease like alcohol? And even at length, even Pluto, who was now becoming old and consequently somewhat peevish, even Pluto began to experience the effects of my ill temper.
One night, returning home, much intoxicated from one of my haunts about town, I fancied that the cat avoided my presence. I seized him, when, in his fright at my violence, he inflicted a slight wound upon my hand with his teeth. The fury of a demon instantly possessed me. I knew myself no longer. My original soul, it seemed at once, to take its flight from my body, and a more than fiendish malevolence, gin-nurtured, thrilled every fiber of my frame. I took from my waistcoat pocket a penknife, opened it, grasped the poor beast by the throat, and deliberately cut one of its eyes from the socket. I blush, I burn, I shudder, while I pen the damnable atrocity. When reason returned with the morning, when I'd slept off the fumes of the night's debauch, I experienced a sentiment half of horror, half of remorse for the crime of which I'd been guilty. But it was, at best, a feeble and equivocal feeling, and the soul remained untouched. I again plunged into excess, and soon drowned in wine all memory of the deed. In the meantime, the cat slowly recovered. The socket of the lost eye presented, it is true, a frightful appearance. But he no longer appeared to suffer any pain. He went about the house as usual, but, as might be expected, fled in extreme terror at my approach. I had so much of my old heart left as to be at first grieved by this evident dislike on the part of a creature which had once so loved me. But this feeling soon gave place to irritation, and then came, as if to my final and irrevocable overthrow, the spirit of perverseness. Of this spirit philosophy takes no account, yet I am not more sure that my soul lives than I am that perverseness is one of the primitive impulses of the human heart, one of the indivisible primary faculties or sentiments which give direction to the character of man. Who has not, 100 times, found himself committing a vile or a stupid action for no other reason than because he knows he should not? Have we not a perpetual inclination, in the teeth of our best judgment, to violate that which is law, merely because we understand it to be such? This spirit of perverseness, I say, came to my final overthrow. It was this unfathomable longing of the soul to vex itself, to offer violence to its own nature, to do wrong for the wrong's sake only, that urged me to continue and finally to consummate the injury I had inflicted upon the unoffending brute. One morning, in cold blood, I slipped a noose about its neck and hung it to the limb of a tree, hung it with the tears streaming from my eyes and with the bitterest remorse at my heart, hung it because I knew that it had once loved me and because I felt that it gave me no reason of offense, hung it because I knew that in so doing I was committing a sin, a deadly sin that would so jeopardize my immortal soul as to place it, if such a thing were possible, even beyond the reach of the infinite mercy of the most merciful and most terrible God. On the night of the day on which this most cruel deed was done, I was aroused from sleep by the cry of fire. The curtains of my bed were in flames. The whole house was blazing. It was with great difficulty that my wife, a servant, and myself made our escape from the conflagration. The destruction was complete. My entire worldly wealth was swallowed up, and I resigned myself thenceforward to despair.
I am above the weakness of seeking to establish a sequence of cause and effect between the disaster and the atrocity, but I am detailing a chain of facts and wished not to leave even a possible link imperfect. On the day succeeding the fire, I visited the ruins. The walls, with one exception, had fallen in. This exception was found in a compartment wall not very thick, which stood about the middle of the house, and against which had rested the head of my bed. The plastering had here, in great measure, resisted the action of the fire, a fact which I attribute to its having been recently spread. About this wall a dense crowd were collected, many persons seeming to be examining a particular portion of it with a very minute and eager attention. The words "strange," "singular," and other similar expressions excited my curiosity. I approached and saw, as if the graven in bass upon a white surface, the figure of a gigantic cat. The impression was given with an accuracy truly marvelous. There was a rope about the animal's neck. When I first beheld this apparition, for I could scarcely regard it as less, my wonder and my terror were extreme. But at length reflection came to my aid. The cat, I remembered, had been hung in a garden adjacent to the house. Upon the alarm of fire, this garden had been immediately filled by the crowd, by someone of whom the animal must have been cut from the tree and thrown down, through an open window, into my chamber. This had probably been done with the view of arousing me from sleep. The falling of other walls had compressed the victim of my cruelty into the substance of the freshly spread plaster, the lime of which, with the flames and the ammonia from the carcass, had then accomplished the portrait as I saw it. Although I thus readily accounted to my reason, if not altogether to my conscience, for the startling fact just detailed, it did not the less fail to make a deep impression upon my fancy. For months I could not rid myself of the phantasm of the cat, and during this period there came back into my spirit a half sentiment that seemed but was not remorse. I went so far as to regret the loss of the animal, and to look about me among the vile haunts which I now habitually frequently for another pet of the same species, and of somewhat similar appearance, with which to supply its place. One night, as I sat half stupefied in a den of more than infamy, my attention was suddenly drawn to some black object, reposing upon the head of one of the immense hogsheads of gin or rum which constituted the chief furniture of this apartment. It had been looking steadily at the top of this hogshead for some minutes. And what now caused me surprise was the fact that I had not sooner perceived the object thereupon. I approached it, and I touched it with my hand. It was a black cat, a very large one, fully as large as Pluto and closely resembling him in every respect but one. Pluto had not one white hair upon any portion of his body, but this cat had a large, although indefinite, splotch of white covering nearly the whole region of his breast. Upon my touching him, he immediately arose, purred loudly, rubbed against my hand, and appeared delighted with my notice. And then was the very creature of which I was in search. I had once offered to purchase it of the landlord, but this person made no claim to it, knew nothing of it, had never seen it before. I continued my caresses, and when I prepared to go home, the animal evinced a disposition to accompany me. I permitted it to do so, occasionally stooping and patting it as I proceeded. When it reached the house, it domesticated itself at once and became immediately a great favorite with my wife.
For my own part, I soon found a dislike to it arising within me. This was just the reverse of what I had anticipated, but I know not how or why it was. Its evident fondness for myself rather disgusted and annoyed me. By slow degrees, these feelings of disgust and annoyance rose into the bitterness of hatred. I avoided the creature. A certain sense of shame and the remembrance of my former deed of cruelty preventing me from physically abusing it. I did not, for some weeks, strike or otherwise violently ill-use it, but gradually, very gradually, I came to look upon it with an unutterable loathing, and to flee silently from its odious presence as from the breath of a pestilence. What added, no doubt, to my hatred of the beast was the discovery on the morning after I brought it home that, like Pluto, it also had been deprived of one of its eyes. This circumstance, however, only endeared it to my wife, who, as I've already said, possessed in a high degree that humanity of feeling which had once been my distinguishing trait, and the source of many of my simplest and purest pleasures. With my aversion to this cat, however, its partiality for myself seemed to increase. It followed my footsteps with a pertinacity which it would be difficult for the reader to comprehend. Whenever I sat, it would crouch beneath my chair or spring upon my knees, covering me with its loathsome caresses. If I arose to walk, it would get between my feet and nearly throw me down, or fastening its long, sharp claws in my dress, clamber in like manner to my breast. At such times, although I longed to destroy it with a blow, I was yet withheld from so doing, partly by a memory of my former crime, but chiefly, let me confess it at once, an absolute dread of the beast. This dread was not exactly a dread of physical evil, and yet I should be at a loss how otherwise to define it. I am almost ashamed to own, yes, even in this felon's cell, I am almost ashamed to own that the terror and the horror with which this animal inspired me had been heightened by one of the merest chimeras that it would be possible to conceive. My wife had called my attention more than once to the character of the mark of white hair of which I have spoken, and which constituted the sole visible difference between the strange beast and the one I had destroyed. The reader will remember that this mark, although large, had originally been very indefinite, but by slow degrees nearly imperceptible, in which for a long time my reason struggled to reject as fanciful, it had at length assumed a rigorous distinctness of outline. It was now the representation of an object that I shudder to name, and for this, above all, I loathed and dreaded, and would have rid myself of the monster had I dared. It was now, I say, the image of a hideous, of a ghastly thing, of the gallows. Oh, mournful and terrible engine of horror, of crime, of agony, and of death. And now was I indeed wretched beyond the wretchedness of mere humanity. And a brute beast, whose fellow I had contemptuously destroyed, a brute beast to work out for me, a man fashioned in the image of the high God? So much of insufferable woe. Alas, neither by day nor by night knew I the blessing of rest any more. During the former, the creature left me no moment alone, and in the latter, I started hourly from dreams of unutterable fear to find the hot breath of the thing upon my face, and its vast weight an incarnate nightmare that I had no power to shake off, incumbent eternally upon my heart.
Beneath the pressure of torments such as these, the feeble remnant of the good within me succumbed. Evil thoughts became my sole intimates, the darkest and most evil of thoughts. The moodiness of my usual temper increased to hatred of all things and of all mankind, while from the sudden, frequent, and ungovernable outbursts of fury to which I now blindly abandoned myself, my uncomplaining wife, alas, was the most usual and the most patient of sufferers. One day she accompanied me, upon some household errand, into the cellar of the old building which our poverty compelled us to inhabit. The cat followed me down the steep stairs, and nearly throwing me headlong, exasperated me to madness, uplifting an axe, and forgetting in my wrath the childish dread which had hitherto stayed my hand, I aimed a blow at the animal, which, of course, would have proved instantly fatal had it descended as I wished. But this blow was arrested by the hand of my wife. Goaded by the interference into a rage more than demoniacal, I withdrew my arm from her grasp and buried the axe in her brain. She fell dead upon the spot, without a groan. This hideous murder accomplished, I set myself forthwith, and with entire deliberation, to the task of concealing the body. I knew that I could not remove it from the house either by day or night, without the risk of being observed by my neighbors. Many projects entered my mind. At one point I thought of cutting the corpse into minute fragments and destroying them by fire. At another, I resolved to dig a grave for it in the floor of the cellar. Again, I deliberated about casting it into the well in the yard, about packing it in a box, as if merchandise, with the usual arrangements, and getting a porter to take it from the house. Finally, I hit on what would be a better expedient than either of these. I determined to wall it up in the cellar, as the monks of the Middle Ages are recorded to have walled up their victims. For a purpose such as this, the cellar was well adapted. Its walls were loosely constructed and had lately been plastered throughout with a rough plaster, which the dampness of the atmosphere had prevented from hardening. Moreover, in one of the walls was a projection, caused by a false chimney or fireplace that had been filled up and made to resemble the rest of the cellar. I made no doubt that it could readily displace the bricks at this point, insert the corpse, and wall the whole up as before, so that no eye could detect anything suspicious. And in this calculation I was not deceived. By means of a crowbar I easily dislodged the bricks, and having carefully deposited the body against the inner wall, I propped it in that position, while with little trouble I relaid the whole structure as it originally stood, having procured mortar, sand, and hair with every possible precaution. I prepared a plaster which could not be distinguished from the old, and with this I very carefully went over the new brickwork. When I had finished, I felt satisfied that all was right. The wall did not present the slightest appearance of having been destroyed. The rubbish on the floor was picked up with minutest care. I looked around triumphantly and said to myself, "Here at least, then, my labor has not been in vain."
The next step was to look for the beast which had caused so much wretchedness, for I had, at length, firmly resolved to put it to death. Had I been able to meet it at that moment, there would have been no doubt of its fate, but it appeared that the crafty animal had been alarmed by the violence of my previous anger, and had forborne to present itself in my present mood. It was impossible to describe or to imagine the blissful sense of relief which the absence of the detested creature occasioned in my bosom. It did not make an appearance during the night, and thus for one night at least, since its appearance and introduction into the house, I soundly and tranquilly slept. I slept, even with the burden of murder upon my soul. The second and third day passed, and still my tormentor came not. Once again I breathed as a free man. The monster in terror had fled the premises forever. I should behold it no more. My happiness was supreme. The guilt of my dark deed, disturbed me but little. Some few inquiries had been made, but these had been readily answered. Even the search had been instituted, but of course nothing was discovered. I looked upon my future felicity as secured. Upon the fourth day of the assassination, the party of the police came again, very unexpectedly, into the house, and proceeded again to make rigorous investigation of the premises. Secure, however, in the inscrutability of my place of concealment, I felt no embarrassment whatsoever. The officers bade me to accompany them in their search. They left no nook or corner unexplored. At length, for the third or fourth time, they ascended into the cellar. I quivered not a muscle. My heart beat calmly as that of one who slumbers in innocence. I walked the cellar from end to end. I folded my arms upon my bosom and roamed easily to and fro. The police were thoroughly satisfied and ready to depart. The glee in my heart was too strong to be restrained. I burned to say, if but one word. "Gentlemen," I said at last as the party ascended the stairs, "I'm delighted to have allayed your suspicions. I wish you all health and a little more courtesy. By the way, gentlemen, this is a very well-constructed house. By the rabid desire to say something easily, I scarcely knew what to utter at all. I may say, an excellently constructed house. These walls, are you going, gentlemen? These walls are solidly put together. And here, through the mere frenzy of bravado, I rapped heavily with the cane, which I held in my hand, upon the very portion of brickwork behind which stood the corpse of the wife of my bosom. But may God shield and deliver me from the fangs of the arch-fiend! No sooner had the reverberation of my blows sunk into silence than I was answered by the voice from within the tomb, by a cry, first muffled and broken, like the sobbing of a child, and then quickly swelling into one long, loud, and continuous scream, utterly anomalous and inhuman, a howl, a shrieking, wailing, half of horror and half of triumph, such as might have arisen from only out of hell, jointly from the throats of the damned of their agony and the demons which excelled in damnation. Of my own thoughts it is folly to speak. Swooning, I staggered into the opposite wall. For one instant the party upon the stairs remained motionless, though extremity of terror and awe. And the next, a dozen stout arms were toiling at the wall. It fell bodily. The corpse, already greatly decayed and clotted with gore, stood before the eyes of the spectators. upon its head, with red, extended mouth and solitary eye of fire, stared the hideous beast whose craft had seduced me into murder, and whose informing voice had consigned me to the hangman. I had walled the monster up within the tomb.
It is very seldom that mere ordinary people like John and I secure ancestral halls for the summer, a colonial mansion, a hereditary estate. I would say a haunted house, and reach the height of romantic felicity, but that would be asking too much of fate. Still, I would proudly declare that there is something queer about it, else why should it be let so cheaply? And why have stood so long untenanted? John laughs at me, of course, but one expects that in marriage. John is practical in the extreme. He has no patience with faith, an intense horror of superstition, and he scoffs openly at talk of things not to be felt and seen and put down in figures. John is a physician, and perhaps, I wouldn't say it to a living soul, of course, but this is dead paper, and a great relief to my mind. Perhaps that is one reason I do not get well faster. You see, he does not believe I am sick. And what can one do? If a physician in high standing and one's own husband assures friends and relatives that there is nothing the matter but a slight temporary nervous depression, a slight hysterical tendency, what is one to do? My brother is a physician and is also in high standing, and he says the same thing. So I take phosphates or phosphites, whichever it is, and tonics and journeys and air and exercise, and am absolutely forbidden not to work until I'm well again. Personally, I disagree with their ideas. Personally, I believe that congenial work with excitement and change would do me good. But what is one to do? I did write for a while in spite of them. But it does exhaust me a great deal, having to be so sly about it or else meet heavy opposition. I sometimes fancy that in my condition, if I had less opposition and more society and stimulus, but John says the very worst thing I can do is to think about my condition, and I confess it always makes me feel badly. So I will let it alone and talk about the house. The most beautiful place. It is quite alone, standing well back from the road, quite 3 miles from the village. It makes me think of English places that you read about, for there are hedges and walls and gates that lock, and lots of separate little houses for the gardeners and people. There's a delicious garden, large and shady, full of box-bordered paths, and lined with long rows of grape-covered arbors, with seats under them. There were greenhouses, too, but they're broken now. There was some legal trouble, I believe, something about the heirs and co-heirs. It has been all empty for years and years now, and I'm afraid that spoils my ghostliness, but I don't care. There is something strange about it. I can feel it. I even said so to John one moonlit night. And he said what I felt was a draft and shut the window. I get unreasonably angry with John sometimes. I'm sure I never used to be so sensitive. I believe it's due to this nervous condition. But John says if I feel so, I shall neglect proper control, so I take pains to control myself, at least before him. And that makes me very tired. I don't like our room a bit. I wanted one downstairs that opened on the piazza and had roses all over the windows and such pretty old-fashioned chintz hangings, but John wouldn't hear of it. He said there was one window and no room, not room, for 2 beds, and No near room for him if he took another. He is very careful and loving, hardly lets me stir without special direction. I have a scheduled prescription for each hour of the day. He takes every care, and I'm basely ungrateful not to value it more. He said we came here solely on my account, and that I was to have all the air and rest I could get. Your exercise depends on your strength, my dear, said he, and your food somewhat on your appetite. But air you can absorb all the time. So we took the nursery at the top of the house. It is a big, airy room, the whole floor nearly, with windows that look out all ways, and air and sunlight galore. It was nursery first, and then playroom and gymnasium, I should judge, for the windows are barred for little children, and there are rings and things in the walls. The paint and paper look as though a boys' school had used it. It is stripped off in great patches, the paper, all around the head of my bed, about as far up as I can reach, and in a great place on the other wall, low down. I never saw worse paper in my life, one of those sprawling, flamboyant patterns that commit every artistic sin. It is dull enough to confuse the eye in following, pronounced enough to constantly irritate and provoke study, and when you follow the lame, uncertain curves for a little distance, they suddenly commit suicide, plunge off at outrageous angles, and destroy themselves in unheard-of contradictions. The color is repellent, almost revolting. A smoldering, unclean yellow, strangely faded by the slow-turning sun. It is a dull, yet lurid orange in some places, a sickly sulfur tint in others. No wonder the children hated it. I would hate it myself if I had to live in this room long. There comes John, and I must put this away. He hates for me to write a word.
We have been here 2 weeks, and I haven't felt like writing before since that first day. I am sitting by the window now up in this atrocious nursery, and there is nothing to hinder my writing as much as I please, save lack of strength. John is away all day, and even some nights when his cases are serious. I am glad my case is not serious. But these nervous troubles are dreadfully depressing. John does not know how much I really suffer. He knows there is no reason to suffer, and that satisfies him. Of course, it is only nervousness. It does weigh on me so not to do my duty in any way. I'm meant to be such a help to John, such a real rest and comfort. And here I am, a comparative burden already. Nobody would believe what an effort it is to do what little I am able, to dress and entertain and order things. It is fortunate Mary is so good with the baby, such a dear baby. And yet I cannot be with him. It makes me so nervous. I suppose John was never nervous in his life. He laughs at me so about this wallpaper. At first he meant to repaper the room, but afterwards he said that I was letting it get the better of me and that nothing was worse for a nervous patient than to give way to such fancies. He said that after the wallpaper was changed, it would be the heavy bedstead, and then the barred windows, and then that gate at the head of the stairs, and so on. You know, this place is doing you good, he said, and really, dear, I don't care to renovate the house just for a 3 months rental. Then do let us go downstairs, I said. There are such pretty rooms there. Then he took me in his arms and called me a blessed little goose and said he would go down to the cellar if I wished and have it whitewashed in the bargain. But he is right enough about the beds and windows and things. It is an airy and comfortable room, as anyone need wish, and of course I would not be so silly as to make him uncomfortable just for a whim. I'm really getting quite fond of the big room, all but the horrid paper. Oh, out of one window, I can see the garden, those mysterious deep-shaded arbors, the riotous old-fashioned flowers and bushes and gnarly trees, and And out of another, I get a lovely view of the bay and a little private wharf belonging to the estate. There's a beautiful shaded lane that runs down there from the house. I always fancy I see people walking in these numerous paths and arbors, but John has cautioned me not to give way to fancy in the least. He says that with my imaginative power and habit of story making, a nervous weakness like mine is sure to lead to all manner of excited fancies, and that I ought to use my will and good sense to check the tendency. So I try. I think sometimes that if I were only well enough to write a little, it would relieve the press of ideas and rest me. But I find I get pretty tired when I try. Oh, it is so discouraging not to have any advice and companionship about my work. When I get really well, John says we will ask Cousin Henry and Julia down for a long visit. But he says he would as soon put fireworks in my pillowcase as to let me have those stimulating people about now. I wish I could get well faster. But I must not think about that. This paper looks to me as if it knew what a vicious influence it had. There's a recurrent spot where the pattern lolls like a broken neck and two bulbous eyes stare at you upside down. I get positively angry with the impertinence of it and the everlastingness. Up and down and sideways they crawl, and those absurd, unblinking eyes are everywhere. There's one place where two breadths didn't match, and the eyes go all up and down the line, one a little higher than the other. I never saw so much expression in an inanimate thing before, and we all know how much expression they have. I used to lie awake as a child and get more entertainment and terror out of blank walls and plain furniture than most children could find in a toy store. I remember what a kindly wink the knobs of our big old bureau used to have, and there was one chair that always seemed like a strong friend. I used to feel that if any of the other things looked too fierce, I could always hop into the chair and be safe. The furniture in this room is no worse than inharmonious, however, for we had to bring it all from downstairs. I suppose this was when this was used as a playroom. They had to take the nursery things out, and no wonder I never saw such ravages as the children have made. The wallpaper, as I have said before, is torn off in spots, and it sticketh closer than a brother. They must have had perseverance as well as hatred. And the floor is scratched and gouged and splintered, and the plaster itself is dug out here and there, and this great heavy bed, which is all we found in the room, looks at it as if it had been through the wars. But I don't mind a bit. Only the paper. Here comes John's sister, such a dear girl she is, and so careful of me. I must not let her find me writing. She is a perfect and enthusiastic housekeeper and hopes for no better profession. I verily believe that she thinks it is the writing which made me sick. But I can write when she is out and see her a long way off from these windows. There's one that commands the road, a lovely shaded winding road, and one that just looks over the country, a lovely country too, full of great elms and velvet meadows. This wallpaper has a kind of sub-pattern in a different shade, a particularly irritating one, for you can only see it in certain lights, and not clearly then. But in the places where it isn't faded and where the sun is just so, I can see a strange, provoking, formless sort of figure that seems to skulk about behind the silly and conspicuous front design. There's Sister on the stairs.
Well, the 4th of July is over. The people are gone, and I'm tired out. John thought it might do me good to see a little company, so I just had Mother and Nellie and the children down for the week. Of course, I didn't do a thing. Jenny sees to everything now. But it tired me all the same. John says I don't pick up faster, he shall send me to Ware Mitchell in the fall. But I don't want to go there at all. I had a friend who was in his hands once, and she said he is just like John and my brother, only more so. Besides, it is such an undertaking to go so far. I don't feel as if it was worthwhile to turn my hand over for anything, and I'm getting dreadfully fretful and querulous. I cry at nothing, then cry most of the time. Of course, I don't when John is here or anybody else, but when I'm alone. And I am alone a good deal just now. John is kept in town very often by serious cases, and Jenny is good and lets me alone when I want her to. So I walk a little in the garden or down that lovely lane, sit on the porch under the roses, and lie down up here a good deal. I'm getting really fond of the room in spite of the wallpaper. Perhaps because of the wallpaper. It dwells in my mind so. I lie here on this great immovable bed. It is nailed down, I believe, and follow that pattern about by the hour. It is as good as gymnastics, I assure you. I start, we'll say, at the bottom, down in the corner, over there where it has not been touched. And I determine for the 1000th time that I will follow that pointless pattern to some sort of a conclusion. I know a little of the principle of design, and I know this thing was not arranged on any laws of radiation, or alternation, or repetition, or symmetry, or anything else that I ever heard of. It is repeated, of course, by the breadths, but not otherwise. Looked at in one way, each breadth stands alone. Bloated curves and flourishes, a kind of debased Romanesque with delirium tremens, go waddling up and down in isolated columns of fatuity. But on the other hand, they connect diagonally, and the sprawling outlines run off in great slanting waves of optic horror, like a lot of wallowing seaweeds in full chase. The whole thing goes horizontally too, at least it seems so, and I exhaust myself in trying to distinguish the order of its going in that direction. They have used a horizontal breadth for a frieze, and that adds wonderfully to the confusion. There's one end of the room where it is almost intact, and there, when the cross lights fade and the low sun shines directly upon it, I can almost fancy radiation after all. The interminable grotesques seem to form around a common center and rush off in headlong plunges of equal distraction. It makes me tired to follow it. I'll take a nap, I guess.
I don't know why I should write this. I don't want to. I don't feel able. And I know John would think it absurd, but I must say what I feel and think in some way. It is such a relief, but the effort is getting to be greater than the relief. Half the time now I am awfully lazy and I lie down ever so much. John says I mustn't lose my strength, and he has me take cod liver oil and lots of tonics and things, to say nothing of ale and wine and rare meat. Dear John, he loves me very dearly and hates to have me sick. I tried to have a real, earnest, reasonable talk with him the other day and tell him how I wish he would let me go and visit Cousin Henry and Julia. But he said I wasn't able to go, nor stand it after I got there, and I did not make out a very good case for myself because I was crying before I had finished. It's getting to be a great effort for me to think straight. It's just this nervous weakness, I suppose. Dear John, he gathered me up in his arms and just carried me upstairs and laid me on the bed and sat by me and read to me until it tired my head. He said that I was his darling and his comfort and all he had, and that I must take care of myself for his sake and keep well. He says no one but myself can help me out of it, that I must use my will and self-control and not let silly fancies run away with me. There is one comfort. The baby is well and happy and does not have to occupy this nursery with the horrid wallpaper. If we had not used it, that blessed child would have. What a fortunate escape. Why, I wouldn't have a child of mine, an impressionable little thing, live in such a room for worlds. I never thought of it before, but it is lucky that John kept me here after all. I can stand it. Much easier than a baby, you see. Of course, I never mention it to them anymore. I am too wise. But I keep watch on it all the same. There are things in that wallpaper. Things nobody knows but me or ever will. Behind that outside pattern, the dim shape gets clearer every day. It's always the same shape, only very numerous. It is like a woman stooping down and creeping about behind the pattern, and I don't like it a bit. And I wonder, I begin to think, I wish John would take me away from here. It's so hard to talk to John about my case because he is so wise and because he loves me so, but I tried last night. It was moonlight. The moon shines in all around just as the sun does. And I hate to see it sometimes. It creeps so slowly and always comes in by one window or another. John was asleep, and I hated to waken him, so I kept still and watched the moonlight on that undulating wallpaper until I felt creepy. The faint figure behind the wallpaper seemed to shake the pattern as if she wanted to get out. I got up softly and went to feel the paper, to see if the paper did move. And when I came back, John was awake. "What is it, little girl?" he asked. "Don't go walking about like that. You'll get cold." I thought it was a good time to talk, so I told him that I was really not gaining here, and I wished he would take me away. "Why, darling," said he, "our lease will be up in 3 weeks, and I can't see how to leave before. The repairs are not done at home, and I cannot possibly leave town just now. Of course, if you were in any danger, I could and would, but you really are better, dear, whether you can see it or not. I am a doctor, dear, and I know you are gaining flesh and color, and your appetite is better. I feel really much easier about you." I don't weigh a bit more, said I, nor as much, and my appetite may be better in the evening when you are here, but it is worse in the morning when you are away. Bless her little heart, said he with a big hug. She shall be as sick as she pleases, but now let's improve the shining hours by going to sleep and talk about it in the morning. And you won't go away? I asked gloomily. Why? How can I, dear? It is only 3 weeks more, and then we will take a nice little trip for a few days while Jenny is getting the house ready. Really, dear, you are better. Better in body, perhaps, I began. But I stopped short, for he sat up straight, and he looked at me with such a stern and reproachful look that I could not say another word. My darling, said he, I beg of you, for my sake and for our child's sake, as well as for your own, that you never for one instant let that enter your mind. There is nothing so dangerous, so fascinating to a temperament like yours. It is a false and foolish fancy. Can you not trust me as a physician when I tell you so? So, of course, I said no more on that score, and we went to sleep before long. He thought I was asleep first, but I wasn't. I lay there for hours, trying to decide whether that front pattern and the back pattern really did move together or separately. See, on a pattern like this by daylight, there is a lack of sequence, a defiance of law that is a constant irritant to a normal mind. The color is hideous enough and unreliable enough and infuriating enough, but the pattern is torturing. You think you have mastered it, but just as you get well underway and following, it turns a back somersault, and there you are. It slaps you in the face, and it knocks you down, and it tramples upon you, and it's like a bad dream. And the outside pattern is a florid arabesque reminding one of a fungus. If you can imagine a toadstool in joints, an interminable string of toadstools budding and sprouting in endless convolutions, why, that is something like it. That is sometimes. See, there is a marked peculiarity about this paper, a thing nobody seems to notice but myself. And that is that it changes as the light changes. When the sun shoots in through the east window, I always watch for the first long straight ray. It changes so quickly that I never can believe it. And that is why I always watch. By moonlight. The moon shines in all night when there is a moon. I wouldn't know it was the same paper. At night, in any kind of light, twilight, candlelight, lamplight, and worst of all, by moonlight, it becomes bars. The outside pattern, I mean. And the woman behind it is as plain as can be. I didn't realize for a long time what the thing was that showed behind the dim sun pattern, but I am quite sure it is a woman. By daylight, she is subdued, quiet. I fancy it is the pattern that keeps her so still. It is so puzzling. It keeps me quiet by the hour. I lie down ever so much now. John says it is good for me to sleep all that I can. Indeed, he started the habit by making me lie down for an hour after each meal. And it is a very bad habit, I am convinced, for you see, I don't sleep. And that cultivates a deceit, for I don't tell them that I am awake. Oh, no. The fact is, I am getting a little afraid of John. He seems very queer sometimes, and even Jenny has an inexplicable look. It strikes me occasionally, just as a scientific hypothesis, that
Perhaps it is the paper. I have watched John when he did not know I was looking, and I came into the room suddenly on most innocent excuses, and I've caught him several times looking at the paper. And Jenny, too. I caught Jenny with her hand on it once. She didn't know I was in the room. And when I asked her in a quiet, very quiet voice, with the most restrained manner possible, what she was doing with the paper, she turned around as if she had been caught stealing and looked quite angry and asked me why I should frighten her so. Then she said the paper stained everything it touched, that she had found yellow smooches on my clothes and John's, and she wished we would be more careful. Did not that sound innocent? But I know she was studying that pattern, and I am determined that nobody shall find it out but myself.
Life is very much more exciting now than it used to be. You see, I have something more to expect, something to look forward to, something to watch. I really do eat better, and I am more quiet than I was. John is so pleased to see me improve. He even laughed a little the other day and said I seem to be flourishing in despite of my wallpaper. I turned it off with a laugh. I had no intention of telling him it was because of the wallpaper. He might make fun of me. He might even send me away. I don't want to leave now until I found it out. There's one more week, and I think that'll be enough.
I am feeling ever so much better. I don't sleep much at night anymore, for it is so interesting to watch developments. But I do sleep a good deal in the daytime. In the daytime, it is tiresome and perplexing. There are always new shoots on the fungus and new shades of yellow all over it. I cannot keep count of them, though I have tried conscientiously. It is the strangest yellow, that wallpaper. It makes me think of all the yellow things I ever saw. Not beautiful ones like buttercups, but old, foul, bad yellow things. But there's something else about that paper. The smell. I noticed it when we first came into the room, but with so much air and sun, it was not bad. But now that we've had a week of fog and rain, whether the windows are open or not, the smell is here. It creeps all over the house. I find it hovering in the dining room and skulking in the parlor, hiding in the hall, and lying for wait for me on the stairs. Oh, it gets into my hair. Even if I go to ride and turn my head suddenly in surprise that there is that smell. And such a peculiar odor, too. I have spent hours in trying to analyze it to find out what it smelled like. It is not bad at first, and very gentle, but quite the subtlest, most enduring odor I ever met. In this damp weather, it is awful. I wake up at night and find it hanging over me. It used to disturb me. I seriously thought of burning the house just to reach the smell. But now I am used to it. The only thing that I can think that it is like is a yellow smell. There's a very funny mark low down on this wall near the mopboard. A streak that runs round every piece of furniture except the bed. Long, straight, even smooch, as if somebody had rubbed it over and over again. I wonder how they did it, and who did it, and what they did it for. Round and round and round and round and round and round. It makes me dizzy.
I really have discovered something at last. Through watching so much at night, when it changes so, I have finally found out. The front pattern does move. And no wonder the woman behind shakes it. Oh, sometimes I think there are many women behind, and sometimes only one. And she crawls around fast, and her crawling shakes it all over. Then in the very bright spots, she keeps still. And in the very shady spots, she takes hold of those bars and shakes them. And she's all the time trying to climb through, but nobody can climb through that pattern. It strangles so. I think that's why it has so many heads. They get through, and then the pattern strangles them off, turns them upside down, and makes their eyes white. Those heads were covered or taken off, it would not be half so bad. I think that woman gets out in the daytime. And I'll tell you why. Privately. I've seen her. I can see her out of every one of my windows. It is the same woman, I know, for she is always creeping, and most women do not creep by daylight. I see her on that long road under the trees, creeping along, and when a carriage comes, she hides in the blackberry vines. I don't blame her a bit. It must be very humiliating to be caught creeping by daylight. I always lock the door when I creep by daylight. I can't do it at night, for I know John would suspect something at once. And John is so queer now. I don't want to irritate him. I wish he would take another room. Besides, I don't want anyone to get that woman out at night, but myself. I often wonder if I could see her out of all the windows at once, but turn as fast as I can. Oh, I can only see out of one at one time. And though I always see her, she may be able to creep faster than I can turn. I've watched her sometimes, way off in the open country, creeping as fast as a cloud shadow in a high wind.
If only that top pattern could be gotten off from the under one. I mean to try it. Little by little. I have found out another funny thing, but I shan't tell it this time. It does not do to trust people too much. There are only 2 more days to get this paper off, and I believe John is beginning to notice. I don't like the look in his eyes. And I heard him ask Jenny a lot of professional questions about me. She had a very good report to give. She said, I slept a good deal during the daytime. John knows I don't sleep very well at night. For all I'm so quiet. He asked me all sorts of questions too, and pretended to be very loving and kind, as if I couldn't see through him. Still, I don't wonder he acts so. Sleeping under this paper for 3 months. It only interests me. But I feel sure John and Jenny are secretly affected by it.
Hurrah! This is the last day, but it is enough. John is to stay in town overnight and won't be out until this evening. Jenny wanted to sleep with me, The sly thing. But I told her I should undoubtedly rest better for a night all alone. That was clever, for really I wasn't alone a bit. As soon as it was moonlight and the poor thing began to crawl and shake the pattern, I began to help her. I pulled and she shook and I pulled, and before morning we had peeled off yards of that paper, a strip about as high as my head and half around the room. And then when the sun came and that awful pattern began to laugh at me, I declared I would finish it today. We go away tomorrow, and they are moving all my furniture down again to leave things as they were before. Jenny looked at the wall in amazement, but I told her merrily that I did it out of pure spite at the vicious thing. She laughed and said she wouldn't mind doing it herself, but I must not get tired. How she betrayed herself that time. But I'm here, and no person touches this paper but me. Not alive. She tried to get me out of that room. It was too patient, but I said it was so quiet and empty and clean now that I believed I would lie down again and sleep all I could, and not to wake me, not even for dinner. I would call when I woke. So now she is gone, and the servants are gone, and the things are gone, and there is nothing left but the great bedstead nailed down with the canvas mattress we found. We shall sleep downstairs tonight and take the boat home tomorrow. I quite enjoy the room now. It is bare again. How those children did tear about here. This bedstead is fairly gnawed, but I must get to work. I have locked the door and thrown the key down in the front path. I don't want to go outside. I don't want to have anybody come in till John comes home. I want to astonish him. I've got a rope up here that even Jenny didn't find. If that woman does get out and tries to get away, I can tie her. But I forgot. I could not reach far without anything to stand on. This bed will not move. I tried to lift it and push it until I was lame, and then I got so angry I bit off a little piece at the corner. But it hurt my teeth. Then I peeled off all the paper I could reach standing on the floor. It sticks horribly, and the pattern just enjoys it. All those strangled heads and bulbous eyes and waddling fungus growths just shriek with derision. I am getting angry enough to do something desperate. To jump out of the window would be an admirable exercise, but the bars are too strong even to try. Besides, I wouldn't do it. Of course not. I know well enough that a step like that is improper and might be misconstrued. I don't like to look out of the windows even. There are so many of those creeping women, and they creep so fast. I wonder if they all came out of the wallpaper as I did. But I am securely fastened now by my well-hidden rope. You don't get me out on the road there. I suppose I shall have to get back behind the pattern when it comes night, and that is hard. It is so pleasant to be out in the great room and creep around as I please. I don't want to go outside. I won't, even if Jenny asks me to. For outside, you have to creep on the ground, and everything is green instead of yellow. But here, I can creep smoothly on the floor, and my shoulder just fits right along the little smooch around the wall, so I cannot lose my way. Oh, there's John at the door. It is no use, young man. You can't open it. How he does call and pound. Oh, now he's crying for an axe. It would be a shame to break down that beautiful door. John, dear, said I in the gentlest voice, the key is down by the front steps under a plantain leaf. That silenced him for a few moments. Then he said, very quietly indeed, open the door, my darling. I can't, I said. The key is down by the front door under a plantain leaf. And then I said it again several times, very gently and slowly, and said it so often that he had to go and see. And he got it, of course, and came in. He stopped short at the door. What is the matter? He cried. For God's sake, what are you doing? I kept on creeping just the same, but looked at him over my shoulder. I've got out at last, said I, in spite of you and Jenny, and I've pulled off most of the paper, so you can't put me back. Now, why should that man have fainted? But he did, and right across my pathway, so that I had to creep over him all the time.